I'm Clara, and at my cousin's wedding, my husband thought it would be amusing to ridicule me in front of his entire family. He mocked my intelligence, my cooking, and my worth. But what he didn't expect was our daughter's voice. Her words turned the tables in seconds. The wedding hall shimmered under golden chandeliers, every corner glowing as though it had been polished just for this night. Laughter filled the room, glasses clinked, and relatives I hadn't seen in years exchanged hugs and stories like no time had passed at all. I sat at our table, dressed in a simple blue gown that I had chosen after hours of second-guessing myself. I wanted to look appropriate, but not flashy. Elegant, but not the center of attention. Being noticed was never my place, not when I was next to him. My husband thrived in rooms like this. The moment we arrived, he was shaking hands, making jokes, and pulling relatives into stories they couldn't help but laugh at. He had always been that way, loud, confident, the kind of man people described as charismatic. To most of them, he was the shining star of our family. To me, he was a man who had learned long ago that my silence gave him the stage. I smiled when he expected me to, nodded when his stories called for agreement, and tucked away every sting of humiliation behind a careful mask. Our daughter sat beside me, her eyes darting from her father to me, reading my face as though she knew what I was feeling without me saying a word. She had always been perceptive, sharper than I was at her age, unwilling to accept the little cruelties that I had taught myself to swallow. I rested my hand on hers for a moment, giving her a small squeeze, silently reminding her that tonight wasn't about us. It was a wedding. We were guests. All we had to do was blend into the background. The night carried on, the food flowing endlessly, the music soft and charming, the air buzzing with chatter and laughter. When the time came for the toasts, the host called for relatives to step forward and share their words. I watched as people stood, one by one, telling stories of the couple, sharing warm memories, jokes, blessings for the future. Applause followed every speech, the room filled with a glow of kindness and joy. And then, my husband rose. I felt my stomach tighten the moment he stood up. His suit was tailored perfectly, his smile gleaming as though he had been preparing for this spotlight all evening. The microphone fit into his hand like it belonged there, and the crowd quieted at once, their attention completely his. First of all, he began, his voice carrying easily across the hall, "Let's congratulate the newlyweds on this beautiful occasion. You both look incredible tonight, and I hope your future together is even brighter than this celebration." The guests clapped, a few people cheered. I exhaled quietly, hoping maybe, just maybe, he would keep it simple. But then his eyes flicked toward me, and I knew. He smiled wider, that particular smile I had learned to dread, the one he wore when he was about to make a joke at my expense. "Of course," he continued, "marriage isn't always easy. Take my wife, for example. She's proof that patience is a saintly quality. Though, let's be honest, she needed plenty of patience just to survive in the kitchen." The crowd chuckled. A few laughed outright. My cheeks burned, but I forced a polite smile, lowering my gaze to the tablecloth. "And let's not forget," he went on, "she never finished college. But hey, she finished me off plenty of times with those burnt dinners." This time, the laughter was louder. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably, glancing at me, but most went along with it, treating his words like harmless humor. I kept my back straight, my hands folded tightly in my lap, the smile on my face fixed in place even as my chest tightened. He was only getting started. Story after story tumbled out of his mouth, about my cooking disasters, my lack of sophistication, the way I nagged him about finances, how I was lucky to have married him because otherwise, I would have been just another face in the crowd. Each jab was delivered with a laugh, his audience responding in kind, though I could see the discomfort growing in some of their expressions. My daughter's hand slipped into mine under the table. She squeezed tightly, her fingers trembling with anger. I glanced at her and saw the fury blazing in her eyes, a fire I had never seen in myself. She wanted to fight back. She wanted to stop him. But I gave a tiny shake of my head. Not here. Not tonight. This was his family, his arena, and I had no intention of creating a scene. I had endured far worse in private. This humiliation was nothing new, it was just louder, more public. Still, every word felt like a dagger. The laughter that filled the room scraped against my ears, each chuckle reinforcing the idea that my worth was little more than the punchline of his stories. I wanted to disappear into the chair, vanish from the hall entirely. But instead, I sat there, frozen in place, my face aching from the effort of holding a polite expression. When he finally paused, catching his breath after another round of laughter, he raised his glass and said, "But in all seriousness, she's put up with me all these years. That deserves a medal. Or at least, maybe a cooking class." The hall erupted again. My lips twitched into what might have passed for a smile, but my eyes burned. He returned to his seat beside me, still basking in the applause, looking proud of himself for being the center of attention. He didn't notice the way my shoulders stiffened, or the way our daughter's hand clutched mine so tightly that it hurt. He had never noticed details like that. I wanted to tell myself it didn't matter, that this was just another night of him being who he was, another example of me being small and quiet. But something was different this time. I could feel it in the way my daughter was looking at me, in the way her jaw clenched, in the way she refused to laugh along like the others. She wasn't going to let this pass. I sat there frozen, trying to steady my breathing, pretending his words hadn't sunk so deep. My lips curved into that brittle smile I had perfected over the years, but inside I was breaking. I had grown used to being his punchline, but hearing the laughter echo in that hall, in front of relatives who barely knew me, was a pain I hadn't expected to feel so sharply. I thought I had built enough armor over time, but the sting was still fresh. My daughter never let go of my hand. Her fingers squeezed tighter, her body tense with fury. I could feel her anger radiating like heat, stronger with every second that passed. When her father sat back down, proud of himself, she looked at him with eyes that could have cut through steel. He didn't notice. He never noticed. He basked in the applause, soaking up admiration like sunlight, blind to the storm he had stirred. I lowered my eyes to the table, tracing the edge of the napkin with my finger, but my daughter leaned closer. "You don't deserve this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's fine," I murmured back, my throat tight. "Just let it go." But she didn't let it go. I could feel it in the way she pulled her hand away from mine, the way she sat up straighter, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. She wasn't fine. She wasn't going to sit in silence. My mind drifted to memories I had tried to bury, nights when I worked double shifts while he chased dreams that collapsed before they ever began, mornings when I sold jewelry I had cherished just to pay the bills, years when every ounce of stability came from me, not him. He had built his so-called empire on my back, and yet here he was, ridiculing me in front of everyone as though I had been nothing more than baggage he dragged along. I caught my daughter's eyes, and I knew exactly what she was thinking. She had grown up watching me endure his jabs, his dismissive tone, the way he brushed off every sacrifice I made as if it were my duty, not my choice. She had watched me shrink so many times, but she had inherited none of my silence. Before I could stop her, she pushed her chair back. The sound scraped against the floor, drawing eyes toward us. My chest tightened. I shook my head ever so slightly, begging her not to do this, not here, not now. But she stood anyway. Her small frame seemed taller than ever, her voice clear as she said, "I'd like to say something." The room hushed instantly. Every head turned. My husband looked at her with surprise, then chuckled as if it were some cute interruption. "Go ahead, sweetheart," he said, waving her toward the microphone, certain she would make a light-hearted comment that would add to his show. But I knew. I saw it in her expression, the same fire I used to have before I learned how to bury it. She walked to the front, each step measured, her chin high. My palms went damp, my heart racing. I didn't know what she would say, but I knew she wasn't going to stay quiet. When she took the microphone, there was a stillness in the room I had never felt before. The laughter had faded. The music had stopped. It was just her, a teenager with more courage than I had managed in decades, standing in front of relatives, friends, strangers, and her own father, ready to speak. I wanted to protect her. I wanted to pull her back to the table, shield her from the scrutiny, from the fallout that I knew would follow. But something inside me also wanted her to speak. Some part of me longed to hear someone, anyone, say out loud what I had been forced to keep silent. She cleared her throat, her hands gripping the microphone tightly. "I love my parents," she began, her voice steady, "but tonight I can't sit here and listen quietly." My heart skipped. My husband leaned back in his chair, smirking, still convinced she would turn it into something playful. He didn't know her like I did. He had never truly listened to her, never truly seen her. He had no idea what was coming. As she continued, her eyes locked on me, and I felt a lump form in my throat. She wasn't speaking for herself. She was speaking for me, for every time I had been forced to laugh along with his jokes, for every tear I had hidden in the dark, for every sacrifice erased by his pride. I pressed my hands together in my lap, whispering silently to myself, "Please, don't hurt yourself with this. Please, don't make them hate you. Please, be careful." But deep down, I knew the truth. She wasn't afraid of being hated. She was afraid of me never being respected. And that was why she was going to speak. In that moment, I realized that my silence had raised her voice. All the times I thought I was protecting her by enduring, she had been collecting every memory, every slight, every injustice, building a strength I had lost. I sat there, trembling, as my daughter prepared to do what I never had the courage to do. And as the entire hall waited for her words, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. The microphone in her hands looked almost too big for her, but the way she held it left no doubt, she was in control. The room had gone quiet, every face turned toward her, waiting to hear what she would say. My husband leaned back in his chair with that smug smile of his, the same one he wore whenever he thought he was untouchable. He believed she was going to flatter him, maybe share some sweet childhood memory that would add to his glow. But I knew better. I could see it in her eyes, steady, burning, unflinching. "I love my parents," she began again, her voice clearer, firmer this time. "But I can't sit here and listen while my mom is turned into a joke." The words struck the air like a stone shattering glass. A ripple of whispers ran through the room. My cheeks flushed hot, and for a second I wanted to vanish, to pull her back, to shield her from the weight of what she had just done. But she didn't falter. She stood there, chin raised, as though she had rehearsed this her whole life. My husband's smirk wavered. He chuckled awkwardly, glancing at the guests as though to remind them it was all in good fun. But no one laughed. They were waiting. "She's not just a wife who can't cook or a woman who didn't finish college," my daughter continued. "She's the reason we even have a life to sit here and brag about tonight." My heart thudded in my chest. The weight of her words pressed into me, filling spaces inside me that had long been hollow. She was saying the things I had swallowed for years, the things I had never dared whisper even in the privacy of my own thoughts. "She worked 2 jobs when Dad's first business failed," she said, her voice gaining strength. "She sold her jewelry to pay our rent. She covered bills while he studied, while he struggled, while he tried and failed and tried again. She never complained, never asked for credit, never demanded recognition. And now he stands here, laughing at her, acting like she's less." The room was silent except for her voice. My husband shifted in his seat, the color draining from his face. His confident posture slouched just slightly, his hands tightening on his glass. I had never seen him look that way, cornered, exposed. "She's the reason he has his career," my daughter pressed on. "She's the reason we made it through the hard times. She's the one who sacrificed her dreams so he could chase his. And instead of honoring that, he makes her the punchline of his stories." The guests shifted uncomfortably. Some averted their eyes, others glared openly at him. My husband's lips parted as though to interrupt, but no sound came out. For once, he had nothing to say. I sat frozen, my throat aching, tears threatening to spill. I wasn't sure if I wanted her to stop or keep going. I wanted to protect her from the fallout, but at the same time, every word she spoke stitched together pieces of me that had been broken for years. She deserves respect, my daughter said firmly. She deserves gratitude. And she deserves a husband who stands beside her, not above her. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had ever felt. You could hear the faint hum of the lights, the distant clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the nervous shuffle of a chair in the back. My daughter lowered the microphone slowly, her hand steady, her eyes locked on her father. My husband's face had gone pale, his jaw tight. The mask of confidence he wore so easily had cracked. He forced a laugh, thin and brittle, but it died in his throat. No one laughed with him this time. Applause started, not loud at first, just a few claps here and there. But then it grew, spreading through the room like fire. Guests rose to their feet, their faces lit with admiration for my daughter. The sound washed over me, and I felt my chest tighten, my eyes burning with tears I couldn't hold back anymore. She walked back to me, placing the microphone gently on the table as though she had just set down a burden she'd been carrying. She sat beside me, took my hand in both of hers, and whispered, "You don't ever have to let him do that to you again." I couldn't speak. I squeezed her hand so tightly, tears spilling freely down my cheeks. Pride and grief tangled inside me. Pride for the courage she had, grief for all the years I hadn't. Around us, people whispered, casting glances at my husband. His shoulders slumped, his eyes darted around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to validate him, to laugh, to dismiss what had just been said. But no one did. Even his closest friends avoided his gaze. His own family looked away, embarrassed, ashamed, disappointed. For the first time in our marriage, he wasn't the center of admiration. He was the center of disgrace. I had imagined revenge so many times over the years, though I had never acted on it. I had dreamed of moments where his arrogance would collapse, where his cruelty would be mirrored back at him. I had thought it would take me finally speaking, finally breaking my silence. But it wasn't me. It was our daughter. She had done what I couldn't. And in that moment, watching him shrink in his chair while she sat beside me, I realized that her strength was my redemption too. She had carried the truth I had been too afraid to speak, and by voicing it, she gave me back the dignity I had lost. The applause finally faded, and the room returned to its quiet murmur of conversation, but nothing was the same. The energy had shifted. No one looked at him the same way. The charm he wielded so easily was gone, stripped away in a matter of minutes. And it was my daughter, my brave, unshakable daughter, who had turned the tables. The applause still echoed in my ears long after it quieted. I sat frozen, my hand in my daughter's, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My whole life had been a series of quiet humiliations, swallowed words, and forced smiles, but tonight the silence had broken. And it hadn't been by me, it had been by her, the daughter I once worried might grow up too much like me. Instead, she had become everything I wasn't, fearless, unapologetic, unwilling to shrink. I turned my head slightly to glance at my husband. He sat stiffly, his face pale, his jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might crack. He avoided my eyes, avoided everyone's eyes, staring into his glass as if he could drown himself in it. For once, he had no clever retort, no charm to smooth over the damage. His kingdom of admiration had collapsed in the span of a few minutes, and all the applause that had once been his now belonged to our daughter. Guests leaned toward one another, whispering. Some glanced at me with soft smiles, their eyes filled with a kind of respect I hadn't seen directed at me in years. Others looked at him with thinly veiled contempt, the kind of look you give a man when you finally see through him. His own siblings avoided him, focusing instead on my daughter, praising her courage under their breath. Even his parents, who had always defended him blindly, couldn't mask their disappointment. His mother's lips pressed into a hard line, his father's eyes narrowed as though he had been waiting years to see his son stripped of his arrogance. I should have felt pity for him, but I didn't. Not even a flicker. All I felt was relief. Relief that the truth had been spoken, that I no longer carried it alone, that everyone finally saw what had been hidden behind his polished smile. When the evening carried on, the shift in the air was undeniable. People who once flocked to him now gravitated toward me and my daughter. They asked how we were doing, offered words of admiration for her courage, and spoke to me as though I mattered, as though I hadn't been invisible all these years. It was overwhelming, but it was also liberating. For the first time in so long, I felt seen. My husband tried to salvage the night. I watched him attempt small talk with relatives, forcing laughter, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. But every attempt fell flat. The charm that had once carried him effortlessly through gatherings was gone, deflated by the truth that had been laid bare. No one was interested in his stories anymore. They were polite, yes, but distant, their eyes sliding past him, their attention fixed elsewhere. Later, when the music swelled again and guests returned to dancing, he leaned close to me, his voice low and sharp. "You should have stopped her," he hissed. I turned to him slowly, meeting his eyes for the first time that night. My voice was calm, steadier than I had expected. "Why?" "Because she told the truth?" His mouth opened, then closed. He had no answer. He sat back, fuming, but he couldn't argue with me. Not anymore. The truth was out, and no matter how much he hated it, he couldn't shove it back into silence. My daughter leaned her head on my shoulder, whispering, "I'm proud of you, Mom." But it was me who was proud of her. Proud that she had carried strength where I had carried silence, proud that she had refused to let me be humiliated one more time without a fight. I kissed the top of her head, my tears finally drying, my heart feeling lighter than it had in years. The rest of the evening blurred together. I no longer felt like a shadow at my husband's side. People sought me out, wanted to hear my stories, wanted to know me beyond the title of wife. My daughter stayed close, her hand never far from mine, as though she knew I might still collapse under the weight of it all. But instead of collapsing, I felt myself rising, standing taller in ways that had nothing to do with posture. By the time the night ended and we walked out into the cool air, my husband was still seething silently. He walked ahead of us, his steps clipped, his shoulders rigid, as if trying to outrun the shame that clung to him. I didn't chase after him. I didn't try to soothe him, or remind him it wasn't so bad, or patch up the cracks in his pride. For once, his humiliation wasn't mine to carry. I walked slowly with my daughter, her arm looped through mine. "You were so brave," I whispered. She looked up at me with the same steady fire in her eyes. "You've been brave too, Mom. Just in a different way. But it's time you stop being quiet." Her words pierced me, but not like a wound, more like a key unlocking something I had buried. She was right. My silence had been survival, but it had also been surrender. And tonight, because of her, I had tasted what it felt like to be free of it. When we reached the car, I looked back at the hall one last time. Inside, the laughter and music still carried on, but I knew the story of that night would linger far longer than the celebration. Whispers would spread. Relatives would retell it. And every time they did, my husband would pale a little more in their memory, while my daughter's courage, and my quiet endurance, would shine brighter. He thought he could shame me in front of everyone, turn me into nothing but a joke. But in trying to make me small, he had only revealed how small he truly was. And in the silence that followed his humiliation, my daughter's voice became the one thing no one could forget. For years, I had wondered if justice would ever come for me, if there would ever be a moment when the scales balanced, when my sacrifices would be seen, when his cruelty would be exposed. Tonight, it happened, not by my hand, but by hers. And though it wasn't the way I imagined, it was more powerful than I could have dreamed. Walking away that night, I knew one thing for certain: I would never be the same woman again. If you felt the power of this story, don't let it fade. Subscribe for more tales of strength, betrayal, and unexpected justice. Share your thoughts in the comments, and join our community where every voice matters. Your support keeps these stories alive. Stay tuned, more is coming.